Welcome to another Thomas Talk. Thank you guys for 400 subscribers, and today we are reviewing Thomas and Friends, The Great Discovery.
Thomas and James are racing to the wharf, and the winner gets a special. Thomas just puffs around James winning the race. Thomas's job is to deliver lumber from the hills down to the wharf with Duncan. Thomas didn't like this job. He didn't want to work with Duncan. He is tricky up in the hills. Thomas waited on Duncan, pulling lumber cars to him, insulting Duncan while he waited, making Duncan cross. Duncan tells Thomas to take an old bridge to the wharf, not knowing it was broken.
When Thomas got to the bridge, it looked very old and about to collapse. The bridge was also the highest bridge Thomas had ever seen. Wheel turn by wheel turn, inches slowly across the bridge. When Thomas got halfway across the bridge, it started shaking, and part in bridge fell in front of him, so Thomas backed off the bridge just in time before it collapsed. Thomas went back to the junction and took out the other track. Thomas puffed slowly onto the old track, and he found a town overgrown by trees and bushes, moss growing everywhere. Thomas was so happy. He went through the town. He went through normal town to find the Fat Controller.
As Thomas was puffing, he heard Madge on the road below him. Madge, sorry.
It's spelled weird.
Yeah. And told her to tell everyone about the old mining town. Madge told Mighty Mac, which Mighty Mac told Sir Handel. Sir Handel then told Scarloey, who told Rheneas. Rheneas told the Thing Controller, who told Harold. Finally, Harold told the Fat Controller. Harold took the Fat Controller to Thomas. Later, Thomas took the Fat Controller to the mining town. The Fat Controller told Thomas this was Great Waterton.
The Fat Controller told Thomas this was the main station of the island, but people left for other towns, and it was lost. Thomas and the Fat Controller went to Tim's sheds and told the other engines about Great Waterton. The Fat Controller said they needed to restore Great Waterton in time for Sodor Day. The Fat Controller tells Miss Jenny to get the pack, Jack and the pack, to come help restore Great Waterton, and they agree. They all work hard the rest of the day to get Great Waterton ready for Sodor Day.
Later at the sheds, the Fat Controller gives Thomas a very important job. He has to find all the lost tracks around Great Waterton and is in charge of all the construction. Thomas was very pleased. The Fat Controller
Go, Grant.
The Fat Controller also said he was bringing an engine to do Thomas's branch line, but he wasn't listening. The next day, everyone gathered to see the new engine. Even Cranky was excited. A new tank engine came out. His name was Stanley, and he was bigger and stronger than Thomas.
Thomas didn't know about Stanley. He was busy finding lots of hidden tracks. Thomas went to look at his new shed for the time. Then James puffed up. James told him about Stanley, and he was doing a great job at Thomas's jobs. Thomas's new shed wasn't that cool anymore. Thomas headed for the docks when he saw Pursley and Stan having a washdown together. Thomas felt left out and puffed away. Later, Thomas saw Gordon and stopped, but before he said anything, Stanley raced past with Danny and Clarabelle. Gordon says Stanley knew how to have fun. That night, Thomas went to Tim's sheds to find Stanley sleeping in his spot. This was the last straw for Thomas, and he headed to Great Waterton. Thomas hated Stanley.
The next day, Thomas was working extra hard to prove he was better than Stanley. Thomas, while hauling Jack to Great Waterton, told him and his pack to work extra hard today. While Thomas pulled some heavy freight cars, he took a bend too quickly and crashed. Edward and the Fat Controller came and told Thomas Stanley would be taking his spot at Great Waterton. Edward took Thomas to the repair yard. On the way, they saw Stanley come around the bend. He said, "Bad luck, Thomas," then disappeared. Thomas and Edward heard cheering in the background of everyone welcoming Stanley.
Soon, Thomas was fixed and headed to Great Waterton. On the way, Thomas saw everyone happy working on different jobs than what he told them. Thomas came into Great Waterton, and it looked like it was almost complete. Stanley and the Fat Controller saw Thomas and called him over. The Fat Controller said Stanley will stay in charge, while Thomas works for him. That afternoon, Stanley asked Thomas to shunt him some freight cars. Thomas had an idea. He would give Stanley too many freight cars, and he wouldn't be able to pull them. Then he could be in charge again. Does that make sense? Stanley came to take the freight cars. He started up the hill. Then his wheels started slipping, the coupling broke, and the freight cars raced down the hill, crashed into the great tower, making it collapse.
The engines all looked at their hard work that just fell, and Thomas felt awful. The Fat Controller came to see the accident and asked Thomas why he shunted so many freight cars. Thomas didn't say anything, though, while the other engines started to whisper about Thomas, too. So Thomas left Great Waterton. He went to an old track he thought the other engines didn't want him anymore, then wanted Stanley instead. Stanley was puffed by Thomas and felt sorry for him.
The Fat Controller called the engines over to Great Waterton and said they must work a lot harder now, or Great Waterton wouldn't be ready for Sodor Day. The engines were shocked and left Thomas alone, feeling unwanted. That night, Thomas went to Great Waterton. All the freight cars were ready to be taken away, thanks to Jack in the Pack. Thomas thought he would shunt them away to make everyone happy again. As he finished the last line of trucks, one got away in front of him in front of an old mine shaft. As Thomas went to grab it, he hit it too hard and sent it into the mine, so he set chase.
It was very dark, but Thomas had his headlight, so he went through the old tracks. As Thomas chased the car, he started having fun racing through the old lines. Then, a junction came into the view of the truck went one way, Thomas went the other. Thomas kept going. He was having too much fun. All of a sudden, the tunnel ahead of him was blocked, and Thomas couldn't stop. He fell through the tunnel and landed on some old wood in the water. The tunnel was flooded. The wood started to drift along, and Thomas tried whistling for help, but no one would hear him. The next day, the engines arrived for work when they noticed Thomas wasn't there. So they went looking for him. James asked the narrow gauge engines while Percy asked Jack in the Pack, but they didn't know where he was. The Fat Controller was called, and he stopped all trains so everyone could look for Thomas. And the great song played.
Thomas rushed through the mine water, picking up speed. Stanley was remembering Thomas when it hit him. Thomas was jealous of him and thinks the other engines don't want him. Then he went to go to the hidden hills. Stanley puffed along the hidden rails, whistling as hard as he could. Thomas was still riding the waves when he crashed into a thick wall of bushes. Then he flew across a ravine and raced down a hill. He finally came to a stop at the bottom of the hill, covered in dirt. Thomas saw he came to a stop by some old tracks.
Stanley looked everywhere in the hills, and though he would blow his whistle one last time, he could see. Thomas heard this whistle, and with his last puff, blew his whistle as loud as he possibly could. Stanley raced to where he heard the sound blowing his whistle, but Thomas couldn't respond. He was out of steam. Stanley found Thomas, and he said he was sorry for how he treated Stanley. He forgave him. Stanley then pulled Thomas back onto the tracks somehow, but broke a valve doing so. So Stanley gave Thomas his coal, and Thomas shunted Stanley home.
Thomas and Stanley puffed into Great Waterton, where they were greeted with whistles from Edward, Emily, and Henry. Stanley was fixed up, and they finished the tower and the rest of Great Waterton. Stanley got to collect the mayor, but Thomas didn't care. The Fat Controller officially opened Great Waterton. Then the engine saw Jeremy bring people to see Great Waterton. And Thomas and his friends blew their whistles all together.
Okay, so I love this plot. It's really nice. It's really well done. Now, I'm going to say, towards the end, one of the biggest mistakes was was Stanley able to pull Thomas onto those tracks without Rocky or someone?
He broke a valve. Doing what?
But my point, okay, and
He's supposed to be strong.
yeah, and all the Jack in the Pack stuff, that is just filler, just pure filler.
It's from the older episodes.
Yeah.
They have to. That kind of sucks, but
So it sucks that that's filler, unlike the other two movies we watched, Hero of the Rails and
yeah, which
Blue
were
Mountain.
all brand. Well, Hero of the Rails couldn't add old stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, Blue Mountain
But
Mystery.
It
That
was
was
still
no filler.
No, nothing.
But I like this movie. This is a very nice movie. I know the great song that happened. I mentioned it.
Where's Thomas?
Yeah, Where's Thomas? I remember that song, but I don't remember this movie at all, which is odd.
Considering this is probably the movie he should hit that in Hero of the Rails. He was 1 and 2, so I
Yeah.
don't know why I wonder.
So, one of the things I don't like about this is basically the Fat Controller just punched Thomas in the throat. Like, oh,
Like figuratively.
yeah.
For all you
He's like,
stupid kids.
he's like, oh, there's Stanley. He's better. Thomas, you messed up. So, you're demoted. No one likes you. And then,
Which got Thomas depression.
yeah, and like he was legitimately depressed. I don't like how the river just kind of
Yeah, that didn't.
ended.
Yeah, it kind of just became ran like a waterfall and just shot down.
And then he goes flying off it instead of going down. He just went flying off the waterfall.
Speaking of, when Thomas flew across the ravine, that model didn't have a face mask. It was just basically one side of him. The rest was just not painted because he only saw one side.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Oh, you watched the behind the scenes. 1 hour later, you'll. He walked out changed.
They wreck these models. I feel so bad.
But they fix them. Well, I think this is a great ending to the models.
Yeah. Stanley's really cool.
Okay, I'll get into the character.
Hold on.
You got more plot?
Yes. So I really like their idea with the making Thomas sad that his friends don't like him anymore. This really added character to this movie because normally it's like a super simple problem in these Thomas movies, especially towards Bubba. So this was more of a real life situation, jealousy, rather than not being able to call someone like in Bubba. And instead you chase them around the world on a boat.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
Anyways, there's one character I want to talk about before the character, which is the narrator. I'm not saying his last name. Hopefully I get the first name right. Pierce is the guest narrator just for this movie, and he is really good. I really like him. He's like a dad reading a book for his son. He just sounds so. It's just so different to any other narrators. It sounds really nice though. Thomas is our main character, and I like that we see his side and the other engines, not just one. So you don't just see on Thomas's side and the other engines are just being a jerk towards him. You see the other engine sides too. So then you get both sides of the story. So the other engines had a right to be mad at him, and they weren't just like super mean. They still liked him.
Mm-hmm.
But we saw Thomas's side, and that he didn't think that.
And Stanley's way cooler.
Wait, Stanley. Stanley was a cool part of the movie. I'm with Grant. I just watch Stanley. Just watch the movie. You'll understand. Stanley is like cool. I don't want to insult him. Yeah, cool.
He looks cool. Better.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Because yes, Grant
is better. His build is better. Everything is better.
Okay, we get it. Thomas is still better.
No,
Anyway,
Stanley is better.
I like Thomas better.
I think we're gonna have to end this soon.
Okay.
I'm getting stressed.
Well, okay. Well, I just want to point out, Stanley doesn't have a flaw. That's his problem. Anyway,
That's the only problem. The problem is he doesn't have a flaw.
the problem is he doesn't. That's what? No. You know what? I'm with Grant. Let's end this video. Get to that
No, no.
closing.
No, keep
No,
going.
he
Keep going.
No.
Fine. Hope you guys enjoyed this movie review. It was thank you for and Thomas and Friends: The Great Discovery.
Thanks once again for 400 subscribers.
If you guys want to see more like this video, then
Like, comment, and subscribe.